In the quiet town of Montgomery, Alabama, the summer of 2004 had begun like any other, with residents moving through their routines and children playing in sunlit yards. But beneath the surface of ordinary life, a lingering shadow persisted, one that had haunted the Baxter family for nearly a decade. On a crisp morning in June 1995, 19-year-old Samantha Baxter, a bright and ambitious college student, vanished without a trace. Her disappearance had left the town stunned, her family devastated, and the local law enforcement puzzled. Initial searches and interviews yielded no solid leads, and over the years, the case grew cold, slipping into the shadows of unsolved mysteries that towns like Montgomery seemed to harbor quietly, almost reluctantly. The Baxter family carried the burden of unanswered questions, hopping against hope that one day Samantha's fate would be revealed. Samantha had been an outgoing and determined young woman, known for her warm personality and dedication to her studies. She had dreams of becoming a social worker, inspired by her desire to help children in vulnerable situations. Friends remembered her as someone who always lent a listening ear and had a contagious enthusiasm that brightened any room. On the day she disappeared, Samantha had left for a part-time job at a local community center, her plans ordinary, her intentions innocent. But as evening approached and she failed to return home, panic replaced routine. Her parents, Margaret and Thomas Baxter, frantically called friends, neighbors, and even her professors, hoping for any sign of her whereabouts. When their search yielded nothing, they contacted the Montgomery Police Department, setting in motion an investigation that would span nearly 10 years. From the outset, investigators faced obstacles. Samantha's disappearance had occurred in an era before widespread cell phone use and digital tracking, meaning there were no digital breadcrumbs to follow. Witnesses were scarce, and the sparse physical evidence provided no clear direction. Detectives meticulously canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed acquaintances, and examined local traffic and security footage, but each lead ended in a dead end. Over time, the trail went cold, and the case was filed among Montgomery's unsolved mysteries. Despite this, the Baxter family refused to give up. Margaret often spoke of Samantha's resilience and courage, holding onto the belief that her daughter's story had not ended in darkness. Thomas maintained contact with the police, encouraging them to revisit the case whenever new technologies emerged that could offer hope. Their determination kept Samantha's memory alive, a constant reminder to the community that even long-forgotten cases could not be ignored. In the early 2000s, a shift in investigative techniques began to change the landscape of cold cases nationwide. DNA technology had advanced, and genealogical databases became increasingly useful in identifying individuals connected to crimes. Montgomery detectives, aware of these breakthroughs, started reviewing older cases, including Samantha's disappearance. Evidence collected in 1995, hairs, fibers, and a few personal items, was carefully preserved, allowing forensic experts to apply new methods without contamination. As the years passed, investigators grew increasingly optimistic that the cold case could be reopened with fresh eyes and modern tools. Meanwhile, the Baxter family watched closely, their hope rekindled each time the police mentioned potential developments in the investigation. In late 2003, nearly 8 years after Samantha vanished, a promising lead emerged. A man named Gerald Lawson, previously questioned in connection with a minor theft near the community center where Samantha had worked, had recently made public statements that drew police attention. Investigators noted inconsistencies in his alibi during the time of Samantha's disappearance and decided to re-interview him, seeking answers that had eluded them years before. Lawson, now in his 40s, initially denied any involvement, maintaining the same narrative he had provided in 1995. However, detectives were persistent, presenting him with new forensic evidence and pointing out contradictions in his past statements. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was tense, charged with the weight of nearly a decade of unanswered questions, and the silent presence of a family desperate for closure. Lawson's initial denials slowly began to crumble under the weight of evidence. Forensic analysts had tested preserved samples from Samantha's belongings, and while no complete DNA profile had been obtained at the time of the disappearance, partial matches suggested a connection to Lawson. Investigators combined these results with behavioral analysis and patterns established during interviews, forming a picture that was increasingly difficult to ignore. The tension in Montgomery grew palpable as law enforcement officials quietly prepared to confront Lawson with the findings, aware that a breakthrough could finally bring answers or further heartbreak. Meanwhile, the Baxter family waited with a mix of hope and trepidation, clinging to the possibility that Samantha's fate might finally be revealed. On a humid afternoon in April 2004, Lawson agreed to a full interrogation after hours of questioning. Detectives presented him with the compiled evidence, including the DNA findings and discrepancies in his previous accounts. The room was silent, broken only by the scratching of pens and the occasional murmured question. Lawson's composure faltered, and under the intense scrutiny, he confessed to having been involved in Samantha's disappearance. The revelation was immediate and shocking, sending waves of disbelief through the police officers present and ultimately reaching the Baxter family within hours. Margaret and Thomas were overwhelmed by the duality of emotions: relief that Samantha's fate was finally revealed, and renewed grief at the details of her tragic end. The confession detailed events that had remained a mystery for nearly a decade. Lawson admitted to encountering Samantha outside the community center and leading her to a remote location under false pretenses. He described actions that were both calculated and disturbing, explaining how fear and circumstance had silenced Samantha in her final moments. Detectives recorded every word meticulously, ensuring that the confession would be admissible in court and provide a clear narrative for the prosecution. While the specifics were painful, the confession was crucial, offering both the family and law enforcement the long-sought understanding of how Samantha's disappearance had unfolded. The community of Montgomery reacted with shock and sorrow. Friends, neighbors, and former classmates struggled to reconcile the ordinary image of Lawson with the grim details revealed in his confession. Local media covered the story extensively, recounting the years of mystery and uncertainty alongside the breakthrough that finally brought clarity. Public forums and community meetings discussed the impact of the case, the importance of preserving evidence, and the role of evolving forensic science in solving long-standing crimes. Samantha's friends organized vigils and memorials, not only to honor her memory, but to support her family as they navigated the complex emotions brought by the confession. For the Baxter family, the days following the confession were emotionally complex. Relief mingled with sorrow, gratitude interlaced with lingering anger. Margaret spent hours reflecting on Samantha's life, recounting memories of her daughter's laughter, ambition, and warmth. Thomas focused on supporting his wife and children, ensuring that the family stayed united as they faced the reality of what had transpired. Emily, Samantha's younger sister, confronted the pain of realizing that the person who had caused their suffering was now identified and accountable. Yet, in the midst of grief, there was also a sense of closure, the knowledge that they could finally grieve with understanding rather than uncertainty. Investigators moved swiftly following the confession, securing physical evidence, corroborating statements, and preparing for legal proceedings. The case was meticulously documented, from the initial disappearance to the breakthrough confession nearly 10 years later. Lawyers reviewed the confession to ensure procedural correctness, and prosecutors began building a case that would leave no doubt in court. Every detail mattered, as the weight of nearly a decade of waiting had heightened both public attention and legal scrutiny. For law enforcement, the successful resolution of Samantha's disappearance reinforced the value of persistence, careful evidence preservation, and the application of modern investigative methods to long-standing cold cases. The confession not only reopened old wounds for the Baxter family, but also highlighted the emotional toll of unresolved crime on communities. Families, friends, and neighbors had endured years of speculation, anxiety, and unanswered questions. The resolution brought an end to that period of uncertainty, but it also forced everyone involved to confront painful truths about trust, safety, and human vulnerability. Community leaders emphasized the importance of supporting families affected by such tragedies, offering counseling, advocacy, and forums for shared healing. In this way, the case had far-reaching implications, extending beyond the individual tragedy to touch the broader social fabric of Montgomery. In the weeks following Gerald Lawson's confession, Montgomery became a town divided between grief, anger, and the cautious relief of long-awaited answers. The Baxter family navigated a world that suddenly seemed both familiar and alien. Their home, once a place of quiet mourning, was now a hub for media inquiries, police follow-ups, and community members offering support. Margaret and Thomas found themselves revisiting memories they had tried to suppress, recounting details of Samantha's daily routines and habits to reporters who sought to understand the life behind the tragedy. Each recollection brought tears, yet also a strange sense of empowerment. Their daughter's story, once obscured, was now being told in full. The family's resolve hardened as they realized that their role had shifted from desperate searchers to active participants in ensuring justice was served. Detectives continued their painstaking work, re-examining all collected evidence and connecting the dots between Lawson's confession and the physical proof preserved since 1995. Forensic teams meticulously retraced the steps described in Lawson's account, comparing them to maps, photographs, and eyewitness testimonies collected years earlier. New analyses of previously overlooked fibers, hairs, and other trace materials confirmed Lawson's narrative, solidifying the case for prosecution. The meticulous nature of this work reflected the lessons learned from years of stalled investigation. The importance of patience, accuracy, and thorough documentation had never been more evident. Each small confirmation brought the family closer to a sense of closure, but the emotional weight of the evidence also made the process incredibly difficult to endure. Community reaction was intense. Montgomery, a town accustomed to quiet daily life, now found itself gripped by the horror and fascination surrounding a crime that had remained hidden for nearly a decade. Local news covered every development, often featuring interviews with Samantha's friends, neighbors, and classmates who remembered her as bright, lively, and full of potential. Schools held assemblies and counseling sessions, particularly for those who had known Samantha personally. Community leaders emphasized the importance of safety and vigilance, using the case to promote awareness of missing persons and to highlight the role of persistent law enforcement efforts. For many residents, the revelations about Lawson's actions were both shocking and disheartening, yet there was a sense of communal relief that justice was finally moving forward. The Baxter family faced the challenge of navigating the public attention while maintaining private grief. Margaret, who had spent nearly a decade advocating for her daughter, became a local symbol of perseverance. She participated in interviews cautiously, careful to honor Samantha's memory without allowing the media circus to overshadow the personal pain. Thomas focused on coordinating with law enforcement, ensuring that every procedural detail was followed and that Samantha's story remained at the center of the proceedings. Emily, Samantha's younger sister, grappled with conflicting emotions, anger at the perpetrator, sadness over her sister's lost potential, and a strange sense of relief that the uncertainty that had dominated her adolescence was finally resolved. Despite the overwhelming emotions, the family found small ways to honor Samantha's life, from organizing charitable contributions in her name to preserving mementos that reflected her passions and ambitions. Legal preparations for Lawson's trial began in earnest. Prosecutors faced the challenging task of translating nearly 10 years of complex investigation and forensic analysis into a coherent narrative for the court. Each piece of evidence, from the DNA results to eyewitness statements and the confession itself, was carefully cataloged and presented to ensure that there would be no room for doubt. Defense attorneys attempted to question the credibility of delayed evidence and the circumstances of the confession, but the thorough documentation and corroboration left little room for ambiguity. Pretrial hearings were tense, with lawyers from both sides meticulously debating procedural issues and admissibility, all under the watchful eyes of a community eager for justice. During this period, the Baxter family also confronted the psychological toll of revisiting traumatic memories. Therapists were engaged to provide support, helping family members process both the relief of knowing the truth and the pain of recalling events they had tried to forget. Family counseling sessions often involved revisiting Samantha's life in vivid detail, recounting the hopes, dreams, and ordinary moments that had been stolen from her. Margaret and Thomas focused on maintaining family cohesion, encouraging Emily to express her feelings openly, and ensuring that the emotional needs of every member were met. The therapy sessions became a vital aspect of the family's journey toward healing, allowing them to navigate the dual realities of closure and loss. As the trial approached, Montgomery residents prepared for a case that would undoubtedly dominate local headlines. Public interest was intense, with many attending preliminary hearings to witness the legal process firsthand. Community organizations offered support for the Baxter family, coordinating meals, childcare, and emotional support to help them manage the pressures of public scrutiny. Local law enforcement also emphasized transparency, providing regular updates to the public while respecting the confidentiality and sensitivity of ongoing proceedings. The collective response of the community reflected both empathy for the Baxter family and a broader acknowledgement of the case's significance in highlighting the importance of resolving cold cases. Testimony during the trial proved harrowing. Detectives recounted the meticulous investigation, highlighting both the challenges of cold casework and the breakthroughs made possible by advances in forensic science. Forensic experts detailed DNA analyses and other laboratory work, explaining how preserved evidence from 1995 had finally yielded critical information linking Lawson to Samantha's disappearance. Friends and classmates testified to Samantha's character and the impact of her absence on the community, emphasizing the human dimension behind the legal proceedings. Each witness added layers of context and emotion, ensuring that the jury understood both the factual details of the crime and the profound consequences for those left behind. Lawson's own testimony was striking, his earlier confession reiterated in court with precision. He described actions and decisions that had led to Samantha's disappearance, offering insight into his mindset and the calculated nature of his crime. While some of his statements were chilling, the courtroom atmosphere was dominated by the weight of justice finally being realized. For the Baxter family, hearing the details in court was painful, yet there was a profound sense of validation in seeing the legal system acknowledge their daughter's suffering. Margaret, Thomas, and Emily listened intently, often holding hands, drawing strength from one another in moments when the emotional burden threatened to overwhelm them. The trial also sparked broader discussions about the evolution of investigative techniques and the importance of preserving evidence for extended periods. Law enforcement officials from other regions monitored the case closely, using Montgomery's success as a model for approaching unresolved cases. The combination of preserved physical evidence, technological advances in DNA analysis, and careful, persistent investigation highlighted the potential for justice even after many years of uncertainty. Public forums, legal seminars, and law enforcement workshops frequently cited the Baxter case as an example of how patience, expertise, and dedication could ultimately bring answers to families who had endured long-standing grief. Outside the courtroom, the Baxter family found ways to continue honoring Samantha's memory. They organized community events, scholarships, and charitable contributions in her name, focusing on causes she had cared about, particularly supporting at-risk youth. These initiatives allowed the family to channel grief into positive action, creating a living legacy that reflected Samantha's values and passions. Friends and former classmates contributed stories, photographs, and memories, ensuring that Samantha's presence remained vivid in the community's consciousness. The healing process was gradual and ongoing, but each small act of remembrance brought moments of peace amidst the enduring sorrow. As the trial progressed, media coverage highlighted not only the details of the crime, but also the resilience of the Baxter family and the broader implications for cold case investigations. Journalists emphasized the importance of never giving up on missing persons cases, underscoring how advances in forensic science could finally provide closure. Community discussions often reflected on the emotional toll of unresolved crime, recognizing the shared responsibility to support families and ensure that justice is pursued regardless of the time elapsed. The combination of legal resolution, technological advancement, and community support created a comprehensive framework for understanding both the crime and its aftermath. By the close of the trial, Montgomery was left reflecting on a decade-long journey that had tested patience, endurance, and faith in the justice system. The Baxter family had endured nearly 10 years of uncertainty, only to find both clarity and heartbreak in Lawson's confession and subsequent legal proceedings. Their perseverance, combined with the dedication of law enforcement and forensic experts, demonstrated that even the most challenging cold cases could be resolved with time, effort, and the application of evolving investigative methods. While the emotional wounds would never fully heal, there was a sense of accomplishment in knowing that Samantha's story had been told, her fate acknowledged, and justice pursued in a comprehensive, public manner. The day the verdict was announced, Montgomery felt an unusual stillness, as though the city itself held its breath. Inside the courtroom, Margaret, Thomas, and Emily clutched one another, their hearts pounding in unison. The judge read the decision slowly, emphasizing each word as if aware of the years of pain, waiting, and uncertainty that led to this moment. Gerald Lawson was found guilty on all counts related to Samantha Baxter's disappearance and murder. Relief and sorrow intertwined for the family, a complex mixture of emotions that was impossible to separate. Margaret wept openly, not only for the loss of her daughter, but also for the release of the decades-long weight that had pressed upon her shoulders. Thomas's hands trembled as he tried to steady himself, a lifetime of unanswered questions finally answered. Emily felt a strange calm, knowing that the person responsible for her sister's suffering had been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, many of them residents who had followed the case for years. Some held signs in support of the Baxter family, while others simply stood silently, paying respect to a life that had been stolen. Local media captured the scenes, showing images of Margaret, Thomas, and Emily embracing, tears mingling with smiles of cautious hope. Community members spoke of the long journey toward justice, emphasizing the importance of persistence, empathy, and support for families affected by crime. For many, the case became more than a story of loss. It was a testament to the effectiveness of law enforcement, the advances in forensic science, and the enduring strength of family bonds in the face of tragedy. In the days that followed, the Baxter family began to navigate the aftermath of the trial. While the legal battle had ended, the emotional work was only beginning. Each family member found their own way to process the mixture of grief and relief. Margaret began writing letters to Samantha, a practice she had started years earlier, now infused with a sense of closure and the knowledge that justice had been served. Thomas took up long walks in the park Samantha had loved, using the quiet solitude to reflect on memories and consider how the family could honor her legacy. Emily returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to live in a way that celebrated her sister's life and the love that had defined their family. These personal rituals were small but vital steps in a healing process that would continue for years. Law enforcement officials, now able to close the case file, reflected on the significance of the investigation. Detectives who had worked tirelessly on Samantha's case spoke about the challenges of cold cases, emphasizing how persistence, careful evidence preservation, and the willingness to revisit old leads could ultimately bring resolution. The role of forensic science, particularly DNA analysis and the techniques used to verify Lawson's confession, was highlighted as a critical factor in securing a conviction. Investigators also noted the collaborative effort between local police, state authorities, and forensic experts, illustrating how teamwork and methodical work could overcome the obstacles posed by time and limited resources. This acknowledgement of professional diligence served as both a reminder of the importance of thorough investigative work and as guidance for other law enforcement teams confronting similar cases. The community of Montgomery, while relieved by the verdict, also grappled with the collective memory of what had happened. Residents discussed the lessons learned from Samantha's disappearance and murder, emphasizing the need for vigilance, communication, and support for missing persons. Schools and community organizations began implementing programs aimed at educating youth about safety, reporting suspicious activity, and supporting peers experiencing trauma. Faith leaders, counselors, and civic groups worked together to provide spaces where grief could be expressed and where families affected by crime could find guidance and comfort. In this way, Samantha's story became a catalyst for community engagement and positive change, ensuring that her memory influenced more than just the immediate circle of family and friends. Margaret and Thomas also focused on long-term efforts to preserve Samantha's memory. They established a scholarship fund in her name, aimed at helping young women pursue higher education and personal growth. This initiative reflected Samantha's own aspirations and passions, offering a way for her legacy to touch lives she would have wanted to inspire. Friends, neighbors, and former classmates contributed to the scholarship, sharing stories and memories of Samantha, reinforcing the idea that a life lost could still have a lasting impact. These actions provided the Baxter family with a tangible sense of purpose, transforming grief into a constructive force that honored their daughter's dreams and spirit. Throughout the city, Samantha's case became an educational point for both law enforcement and the general public. Police departments used her story in training programs to illustrate the importance of detailed evidence collection, persistence, and creative investigative approaches. Forensic science courses highlighted the ways DNA and other technologies could resolve cases long considered unsolvable. Community seminars focused on missing persons, demonstrating how vigilance, reporting, and cooperation between citizens and authorities could prevent tragedies and assist in resolution. By becoming a case study for professional and public education, Samantha's story extended far beyond her immediate family, contributing to broader societal awareness and safety measures. Despite these efforts, moments of sadness were inevitable. Anniversaries of Samantha's disappearance brought renewed grief, and family holidays were tinged with the absence of her presence. Margaret, Thomas, and Emily found comfort in small rituals, lighting candles, visiting favorite places, and sharing memories aloud. These practices helped keep Samantha's spirit alive in daily life, reminding the family that love persisted even when a life was cut short. Friends and neighbors often joined in these commemorations, creating a network of support that emphasized communal remembrance alongside personal mourning. The interplay of grief and remembrance became a defining feature of the family's healing process. The legal resolution of the case did not erase the pain, but it offered a foundation upon which the Baxter family could rebuild. Counseling sessions continued for months, helping each member navigate lingering feelings of anger, guilt, and sadness. Margaret and Thomas worked with Emily to ensure that her adolescence, which had been overshadowed by fear and uncertainty, could transition into a more secure and hopeful phase. They spoke openly about their emotions, encouraging dialogue rather than suppression, and emphasized the importance of leaning on one another for strength. Over time, these efforts fostered resilience and a renewed sense of purpose, enabling the family to envision a future that, while forever shaped by tragedy, was also imbued with hope. In the broader context, the case contributed to a growing awareness about the importance of solving cold cases. Law enforcement agencies took note of the methods used to secure Lawson's conviction, particularly the combination of preserved physical evidence, thorough investigative work, and the strategic use of confessions corroborated by forensic analysis. Community organizations incorporated lessons from the case into public safety campaigns, advocating for vigilance, rapid response to missing persons, and ongoing support for affected families. Samantha Baxter's story became a benchmark for both professional practice and public consciousness, emphasizing that persistence and compassion could ultimately overcome years of uncertainty. Months after the trial, the Baxter family began to participate in public discussions and media interviews, focusing on raising awareness rather than reliving trauma. Margaret spoke at conferences about the emotional and practical challenges of cold case investigations, offering advice to other families in similar situations. Thomas shared his perspective on supporting law enforcement while advocating for victims' rights, emphasizing the balance between cooperation and personal agency. Emily, now older and more confident, became a quiet yet powerful voice for youth education and personal safety, ensuring that Samantha's story continued to inspire protective vigilance and awareness. Through these actions, the family transformed grief into advocacy, using their experience to effect meaningful change in both local and broader contexts. As the first anniversary of Lawson's conviction approached, the Baxters organized a memorial gathering for Samantha. Friends, neighbors, and community leaders came together to celebrate her life, sharing stories, photographs, and cherished memories. Candles were lit, music played, and moments of silence observed. The gathering reflected not only the family's ongoing journey of healing, but also the community's commitment to remembering a life taken too soon. For Margaret, Thomas, and Emily, the event was a poignant reminder that while the pain of loss remained, the bonds of love and memory could endure, shaping both their family and the community around them. By the end of the year, Montgomery had moved forward, yet Samantha's story remained an indelible part of the city's collective memory. The Baxter family, while forever changed by tragedy, had found a measure of peace and purpose through the resolution of the case. Their efforts to honor Samantha's life, support others, and advocate for justice turned personal grief into a powerful force for good. The conviction of Gerald Lawson, while unable to undo the past, provided affirmation that truth, persistence, and love could prevail even after years of uncertainty. Samantha Baxter's legacy endured, a reminder that even in the face of devastating loss, justice and remembrance could coexist, guiding both family and community toward hope and healing.